So it's one thing to have to deal with coronavirus, but a lot of people are trying to figure out spirituality in the age of coronavirus. I mean, these things happen. God always comes into play. I'm Tony Katz, and this is Virtual Bourbon. Now, Rabbi Ben Sendrow is my rabbi. I mean, I didn't have to go far to find him. He was right there waiting for me. He is a longtime rabbi. He is a man who is all things Philadelphia at all times Philadelphia. I mean, he has an obsession, and it's not healthy or okay by any measure. He also smokes cigars with me. He also is known to have a drink. He also spent time as a police chaplain, and he's very much known for being the rabbi who spoke in front of a very large crowd here in my beloved Indianapolis, Indiana, after the shooting that took place at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And a lot of people got to know him from that. And with him, I want to get into this idea of spirituality in the age of coronavirus. But first, of course, it is Virtual Bourbon. I have my glass right here. I am doing what is known as a Big House right here. So this is Big House Bourbon. Now, Big House Bourbon is not a big name. It is not a well-known name at all. But what it is actually very good. Tried this for the first time on the Eat, Drink, Smoke podcast that I do, and I found that it was terrific. It's not necessarily syrupy, but it has this wonderful caramel tone. It has a little bit of these dark fruits. Sometimes you'll think of a drink maybe having like a fruity note, but as you do it more and you get more practice into it, and there's a difference between fruity notes and dark fruits, the plums, the dark cherries, the things like that. This has more of those, to me, dark notes. This actually comes out of Indiana, even though it's not bottled in Indiana, because there's a major maker of bourbon here in Indiana that actually does incredible work. And so I'm doing bourbon, and you, Rabbi, you said I have no time for your silly games, and you went right with the scotch.
Well, I got sick in college on bourbon once. Once you've been, that ruined it for me. So, yeah, and I have to tell you, I wish my parents had been alive to hear that introduction.
Oh, yeah?
Because my dad would have loved it, and my mom would have believed it, and it was great. But here's what I'm doing. My bourbon always comes from Scotland.
Right, because it's not bourbon, it's scotch. The Aberfeldy. That is actually a rather interesting scotch. I have reviewed that on the Eat, Drink, Smoke podcast that I do, which is a review of bourbon and cigars. But so is the scotch all about that one incident in college, which has very often affected people in many ways, or is there something to the taste? Do you prefer the peat, the moss, the smoky to those fruit flavors?
Yeah, I do. I do like that better. But just the smell of the bourbon is enough to trigger unpleasant memories.
Well, I got nothing but time and a full glass, so let's start with the stories. Wait a second. Well, what do you mean strange stories? What happened?
I don't recall. But it couldn't have been good.
Well, listen, to your health, I cheer you.
And to you, L'chaim.
L'chaim indeed. I'm glad you had the time. And we have seen a lot about churches in regards to coronavirus and synagogues, because it was just maybe a week ago at this time that Israel said we're shutting down synagogues. And now over the last, really 2 days, it's been about churches defying orders in the United States and wanting to have these large gatherings. And you have the Vice President, Mike Pence, saying you shouldn't have a gathering more than 10 people. And now you've got this pastor, I think is in Pennsylvania, Swafford, who's like, I want to have the Woodstock of church events. So before we get into the spirituality part, do you need to be at the synagogue? Do you need to be at the church as you see it? Is there some better connection to God there than in my home?
Absolutely not. The connection that's better is the connection between people that you get when you're together in person. But at this time, we're doing that virtually, and we're connecting virtually, and it's a lot better than not having that technology available to us at all and not being able to connect at all. I certainly don't think defying the recommendations of the real experts like Dr. Fauci makes any sense whatsoever. I can't imagine that would make God happier than living in a way that keeps his children safe and healthy.
So now let's follow up. When this is ugly. Now, in terms of total death rate, there are things that are uglier out there in the world. I don't want to overplay it. I don't want to downplay it. I want to be rather honest about what it is that we're looking at, what it is that we're seeing. This is pretty terrible, and people are being hurt. I know people who have coronavirus. You know people who have coronavirus. How do you answer the question, which is maybe it's an insulting question. But I think it is the question. How do you answer the question when people say to you, young or old, how can this happen in the 21st century? How can God let this happen?
My answer to how can God let this happen is to draw a distinction between God and nature. I believe God is good, and I believe God is moral. I don't believe either of those things about nature, which is not to say nature is bad or immoral. It's just that concepts like goodness and morality have nothing to do with nature, okay? This virus is a natural phenomenon. It does not attack the immoral. It does not attack the murderers and the child molesters of the world. If nature were a moral force, that's what would happen. But that's not what happened. We were designed to have a finite lifespan, so imperfection was introduced by God into the equation. Once it's there, it's there. And I am not one who believes that God is choosing who will get the virus, who will not get it, who will recover from it, who will not recover from it. This is nature and science, and I think where God and religion come in is providing comfort to those who are ill and comfort to those who have family and friends who are ill, and connecting us as a community.
All right, I've never done that in separating this is not religion, this is nature, which is an interesting way to look at it, but it doesn't have people saying, yeah, but God still covers it all. I mean, maybe I'm being rudimentary in the conversation, but it still does come up. I'll see people who they'll recover, and on the Facebook post will be like, praise God, and I say to myself, shouldn't you be praising medicine? Shouldn't you be praising those doctors? Shouldn't you be praising the ventilator? I'm not so sure if praising God is the way it should go when there are people who don't make it. Were they not praising God enough?
Right, exactly. That's exactly why I can't believe that God is deciding who gets infected or of the infected who recovers. Again, if that were the case, what we would be seeing is people of poor moral character getting sick and dying, and people of wonderful moral character staying healthy or recovering. That's if God were controlling things. Either that or we have to give up the idea that God is good, and I'm not prepared to do that.
Right.
So I'm much more prepared to give up the idea that God's controlling all of these variables. Can I take a...
Yeah, of course. What can you? There are rules? Of course you can. Please. I'm already on my third glass.
All right.
But that is an interesting take, and one that I had not considered, and certainly had not put into my head. And as you have been, in the interesting side of this, as a rabbi, people call you and like, hey, someone's sick, or hey, someone has passed. So first things first, have you gotten a call from anybody, and you don't have to certainly use names, where someone's passed because of coronavirus, where you intervened in a way?
No, have not gotten that call. I'm terribly afraid that it's coming.
Right.
One of our members is very, very sick, and may survive. And, just to get back to what you were talking about, I can't help myself. God willing, he'll survive. Now that contradicts everything I just said,
Right?
but I have to, I admit that. And here's my justification. When I say God willing, it is a purely emotional statement on my part that I emotionally have to make. I can't say, I hope he gets better. I have to say, God willing, he'll get better. But if you push me and you say, now, wait a minute, do you really think you're saying that is going to affect the outcome of his case? No, it's emotion on my part.
And well, emotion is in a lot of people's parts, right? Emotion is all over uh, this, all over this story. Uh, Not saying that we have anything that could come close to this, right? Whether you want to talk about MERS or SARS, there was not this level of reaction to it. There wasn't this level of stay at home kind of orders that are happening there in a multiplicity of the states. And we should get into, you know, how you think police are dealing with it as a man who has actually worn the uniform. But when you see moments like this happen, a seminal moment, let's call it a September 11th type moment, a moment of when the markets fail and people's businesses fail, and certainly we're seeing that now. A moment like this, do people come to you and talk about their faith being rocked? Do they leave the synagogue like, okay, clearly there's no God, we're done here, I gotta go? Does that happen? Do you ever counsel people on that subject?
I do, and I don't see people leaving the synagogue over it. What I'll get frequently, not exclusively, but frequently, are people coming in to talk to me over their feelings of guilt because they're angry at God for what's going on. And they feel guilty at being angry at God. My response to that is it is a deeply religious thing to get angry at God.
You see, I'm just the opposite. I'm usually angry with God.
Well,
And so that seems to be my default.
That's fine. Let me ask you this. How often are you angry at the Easter Bunny?
I am, since I'm a fan of Cadbury eggs, very rarely. Very rarely indeed.
There you go. People don't get angry at Santa Claus, at least not adults. People don't get angry at the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy. People get angry at God who believe in God. And my argument is God's shoulders are broad enough to deal with your being angry at him, even if it's not entirely justified, which goes back to what I was saying before about God not controlling everything, which is radical. That's a radical statement. I admit it. It's radical.
I don't know if it's radical or pragmatic, to be honest. I'm not actually sure which way that one goes. I think it's interesting that people would reach out because their issue is that they're upset with themselves for being angry at God. Are they upset with themselves for being angry at God because they don't believe they should ever be angry with God? Or are they saying to themselves, I know that's a completely and totally irrational thought, right? Because sometimes we utilize God in the ether as opposed to in a more like daily living sense. Which one is it?
It's the former. It's they feel that their feelings are inappropriate. It's not right to be angry at God. But my question would be, why not? I mean, in our tradition, Abraham got angry with God when God wanted to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham argued very, very forcefully before he remembered to whom he was speaking and changed his tone, but continued to argue. It's an interesting thing. The word Israel means the ones who wrestle with God. So it's kind of in our DNA to argue even with God Himself.
Yeah, but I got to assume there are people out there who aren't Jewish who are also wrestling with it, and that, I mean, these things, I guess, have a way to kind of pile on, or one thing leads to another, and that's, you know, when out of sight, out of mind is real. we already see conversations about religion and where it fits in people's lives in today's America, and kind of downslides, and youth, if you will, getting involved in religion. Sometimes people come back to religion. I think I'm one of those kinds of people, or at least trying to find my way through. Is there a feel from synagogues, other rabbis, that when you have people detached, right, separated from the house of worship, from that community, if you will, kind of feel, neighborhood kind of feel, that they grow accustomed to it and stay detached? Or do you make effort to try and remind people that this will pass and we got to all bring it back in, because this is the center of that experience? Your home and this home are the same home.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's important for us to emphasize that the current normal will not be the permanent normal. I'm noticing an increase in attendance at services when we're doing it via teleconferencing software versus people who would be showing up if the building were open and we were operating normally. I would say 20% more.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that because you look so dang sexy on Zoom?
I rather doubt it, but I'd like to believe it.
See,
Yeah.
if I only use Zoom, I don't use Zoom. See, that's what I mean. You still look great. Don't get me wrong. I just don't use 20. I think that's pretty interesting. Is it are people like, is it interactive in a way? Like, do people get to ask questions? Is it just you and the cantor, right, who sings a lot of the blessings, for people who don't know? Is it that? Where does that, do you think that comes from?
It's none of what you just said. I'm the only one in the sanctuary. The cantor is not there.
Okay.
And I'll tell you what, I have newfound respect and admiration for what you do. I came home last Saturday really tired. It was our first Saturday morning service. And my wife said, "Why are you tired? You started an hour late. We started at 10 instead of 9. I said, "Because from the time I said Shabbat Shalom at 9 o'clock until the service was finished at 12, I could never shut up for 1 second. I was the only one there. If I'm not talking, it's dead air."
Welcome to every day of my life. That's
I said, a newfound, and you know how much I respected you before, but an even higher level of respect.
That's lofty stuff. That's Rabbi Ben Sendrow. When you have the Aberfeldy right there, is that your go-to scotch, or what is Rabbi Ben Sendrow's go-to? What's in the liquor cabinet at home waiting for him later?
For special occasions, it would be Lagavulin.
I'm sorry, it would be what?
Lagavulin.
Oh, I don't know it.
Oh, it's
stumped me. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that was possible.
Really peaty, smoky.
So from the lowlands or from the Islay?
I think from the lowlands, but now you've got me semi-stumped.
Okay. So very peaty, very mossy. See, I got off scotch because I used to do it with a cigar, and they would compete in flavor. I didn't want to compete. I just wanted to win. I just wanted the cigar. All right. So I don't even know how to spell that. So I'm going to let other people figure that out. And if it's not a special occasion, it's just you after a long day, perhaps a ratty Philadelphia Phillies T-shirt, maybe pants. What are you drinking?
Balvenie, which is one of my other favorite single malts, or sometimes you're really counting the pennies, and then I'll pull out Dewar's, which was my father's favorite, Dewar's White Label.
It was everybody's father's favorite.
Right.
Are you kidding? That or Johnny Walker Red, just sitting somewhere in the back of a liquor cabinet. All our parents did that.
Exactly. Someone just gave my son a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue.
Oh, you should steal that bottle. I've met your son. He doesn't deserve it.
Yeah, and he has no idea what he's got.
Well, you know what? Tell him, hey, the red's prettier. You know what?
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay to dupe our children, God said.
Yeah, there you go.
He didn't say. That's Rabbi Ben Sendrow. I appreciate you taking the time. CST Rabbi, if you want to find him on Twitter, CST, that's for Congregation Sherei Tefillah, CST Rabbi on Twitter. So follow him. Rabbi, l'chaim again, and to your health, and let us all stay strong.
L'chaim, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Always, baby. Always. That's right. I call my rabbi baby.